We will now move on to the third and final candidate joining us today, Congressman Adam Schiff. Welcome, Congressman Schiff, and thank you for joining us. As a
Thank you. Great to be
reminder,
with you.
Thanks. As a reminder, there is a structure in terms of time. You will have 1 minute for opening statements, followed by 6 questions, which you will have 1.5 minutes each to answer. And finally, you'll have the opportunity for a 1.5 minute closing statement. You may not ask for the audience vote or financial support, and we ask that you please adhere to the time limits as displayed by the Zoom timer on the right side of your screen. So, Congressman Schiff, thank you again, and you may now begin with your opening statement.
Thank you, Haley. And I just want to change the screen so I can see the timer, which I do not have on my screen. Oh, there it is. Okay, great. Thank you so much. It's a treat to be with you. I thought maybe I would start out telling you a little bit about myself that you may not know from watching me during hearings or in other ways. I'm married. My wife is named Eve. I'm originally from Boston. My father was in the schmata business. He was a traveling salesman. We moved to the Bay Area when I was 11. Where I went to Temple Isaiah and was bar mitzvah there. And I have been very much guided by my Jewish faith, certainly in terms of Tikkun Olam, but even more so by a passage from Micah. What is required of us but to do justice, to love mercy, and walk humbly with thy God? To me, those are great inspirations for my work. I'm grateful to you at JDCA for all that you do, living Jewish values, supporting Democratic candidates, and really looking forward to the conversation today.
Thank you so much. We will now move into questions on a range of issues of importance to Jewish voters. We will start with gun violence. Gun violence is a uniquely American crisis, and at this point, a full-blown epidemic affecting our communities, our schools, our places of worship. Last year, there were more than 630 mass shootings, yet Republicans continue to obstruct the passage of meaningful gun safety legislation, including a ban on assault weapons. What gun safety measures do you support, and how do you propose taking action on this issue if elected to the Senate?
It is so appalling to me that we have to suffer these tragedies time after time after time when we know it would work. We know an assault weapons ban would work. We know universal background checks work. We know a ban on extended ammunition clips would work. We know that my bill, which President Biden has said may be the single most important, to do away with the gun industry's immunity from liability, would also work. What has been lacking is the congressional will and courage of elected officials to do something about it. This is predominantly, almost exclusively now, a Republican problem. And the only way I think we're going to get very meaningful gun safety legislation passed is by doing away with the filibuster, which I also support doing away with for a variety of other reasons, including restoring voting rights, restoring reproductive freedom. But I don't think we're going to be able to take significant action on gun safety unless we do that. And I'm going to fight to do away with the filibuster, to pass an assault weapons ban, to protect our communities. My wife and I have had the same terrible phone call that too many other families have from one of our kids at school, that they're in lockdown, that there's a shooter not far from campus, that they're fine. And thank God they were fine. But for too many other families, it's a very different kind of call. And it's appalling we haven't addressed this. I'm going to fight to do away with the filibuster so we can finally take action.
Thank you. Now on to a critically important issue for Jewish voters, and that's the future of our democracy. Following your work on the first Trump impeachment and on the January 6th committee, you were removed from the Intelligence Committee and censured by House Republicans. Your experience in the House epitomizes the threats posed to our democracy by Republican extremists. Please elaborate on these threats and, if elected to the Senate, measures you would support to defend our democracy.
I never imagined we would see a fraction of what we've seen over the last 6 years in terms of the relentless assault on our democracy, its institutions, or that a leading candidate for president in one of America's two great political parties would be someone who led an insurrection against our own government, incited violence against our own government in the first ever attempt by a president to cling to power after losing. That he continues to enjoy the support of that party is both flabbergasting and extremely dangerous. I was proud to lead the investigation of Donald Trump, proud to lead the first impeachment trial, and to serve on the January 6th committee. I'm going to continue to hold anyone accountable who would tear down our institutions. I have also authored the Protecting Our Democracy Act, our own set of post-Watergate reforms designed to enshrine in law a lot of the norms that were broken down over the last 4 years. We need a leader in the Senate that can take on these big fights. That is, yes, willing to stand up to the Trumps and McCarthys, to get censured, to get attacked, to get vilified, to get the death threats that go with it, to protect our democracy. If we don't protect our democracy, then none of the other priorities are going to matter very much. And so this is, I think, the essential obligation of the next senator from California is to defend our institutions and pass on this cherished legacy to the next generation.
Thank you. Amid the startling rise of anti-Semitism, the Biden White House has demonstrated leadership with the first ever national strategy to counter anti-Semitism. What more can and should be done to combat anti-Semitism by Democrats? And if elected to the Senate, what measures specifically would you support to combat the rise of anti-Semitism and hate?
Well, I obviously feel this issue very keenly, being the subject of a lot of anti-Semitic hate online. I've had more than my fair share directed against me and members of my family, and of course feel keenly this hostility to Jewish students on campus, students who don't feel safe going to class. I've talked to parents who tell me their kids are thinking about taking a year off at some of the most elite universities. I'm the only candidate in this race who has consistently voted for each of the anti-Semitism resolutions that have come before the Congress this year, or actually, I guess it's now last year. And I'm going to continue by taking on the social media companies. I've taken Twitter to task over the explosion of hate as documented by ADL on that platform, only to receive a response on Twitter from Elon Musk that said, "I'm glad you lost your chairmanship. You have a very small brain." This is what we're up against. And I'm going to continue to use my bully pulpit to push back. I'm going to continue to provide resources to the FBI and also oversight of the FBI to make sure that they're cracking down on anti-Semitic hate and in every other respect, push back against this terrible scourge that Jewish community has endured for millennia.
Thank you. Restrictions on abortion access disproportionately affect and burden marginalized and low-income communities seeking abortion care. If elected to the Senate, what measures would you support to protect reproductive freedom and improve access to reproductive health care services for marginalized communities? In addition, do you support abolishing the filibuster to codify Roe and pass federal legislation for protecting abortion access?
Yes, I certainly do support abolishing the filibuster to pass a national right to abortion law, of which I'm proud to co-sponsor. What the Supreme Court did in the Dobbs decision was a terrible tragedy that has endangered the lives of millions and millions of people. It has also meant that thousands and thousands of women have had to carry to term the child of their rapist. And we not only need to pass a national right to abortion law, but I'm one of the lead authors in the House of legislation to expand the size of the Supreme Court, to impose term limits on the court, to essentially unstack and rebalance the court, which was stacked by Donald Trump and Mitch McConnell, by withholding a confirmation from Barack Obama for almost a year while jamming one down the nation's throat during Trump's last weeks in office when people were literally already voting for Joe Biden. So I'm proud to be very strongly pro-reproductive freedom, to have been a champion of reproductive freedom since my first days in office. And I'm going to fight to do away with that filibuster so we can restore reproductive freedom for millions. And going to continue in every way in terms of making sure insurance policies cover reproductive freedom, that we get rid of the Hyde Amendment, which impacts a lot of communities of color disproportionately, so that abortion access is there for every American.
Thank you. We will now move on to two questions that have incorporated audience questions about foreign policy. In late October, President Biden pledged billions of dollars of assistance for Ukraine and Israel, which Congress has not yet funded. Do you support this assistance to Israel specifically without cuts or conditions? And what is causing the delay? Second question, what is your position with regard to a ceasefire between Israel and Hamas?
First of all, with respect to aid to Israel, yes, I support it without cuts or conditions. Unconditionally support that package the president has proposed. And I was very angry when Speaker Johnson decided to condition that aid on cuts to the IRS with the false argument that that would somehow be the fiscally responsible thing to do, since cuts to the IRS, among other things, would only increase the cost of the bill. But more than that, we've never conditioned aid to an ally at war with an unrelated policy issue. That is a terrible road to go down, and just allows hostage taking in terms of the legislative process. So I support that aid unconditionally. In terms of a ceasefire and a very different hostage situation, I don't support a permanent ceasefire while Hamas is continuing to control Gaza, while Israeli and American citizens are continuing to be held hostage. And I don't know how you can ask a nation which has both a right and a duty to defend itself, like Israel, to cease fire under these conditions. I do support humanitarian pauses to get aid in and to get hostages out. I hope the current negotiations are successful in bringing about another pause for that purpose. But I support Israel's right to defend itself. And Hamas, it's tragic, is using Palestinians as human shields. And I grieve the loss of so many Palestinian lives as a result of Hamas using them as human shields.
Thank you. And our final question. Less than a week ago, 3 U.S. service members were killed in Jordan, reportedly by an Iranian-supported proxy group. Since then, the Biden administration has weighed possible responses to the attack. How should the United States respond to ongoing Iranian threats in the Middle East, which has certainly increased since October 7th?
I think the administration should respond to these attacks in a strong way, in a proportionate way, in a way that is calculated to deter Iran and its proxies, but is also calculated not to widen the war. I think one of the things that the Biden administration has done very effectively and is extremely important is do everything possible not to widen the conflict. I would be desperately concerned for Israel's safety if it had to fight a two-front war in the north against the Iranian Hezbollah proxies and in the south against the Iranian proxies in Hamas, not to mention the Houthis. And so I think it needs to be a strong response that deters, but I also think that it has to be undertaken in a way that does not provoke a wider war. And I think the administration has so far walked that very difficult line very well. And I also want to say, how heartbroken I am over the loss of these American lives, these service members who are there fighting ISIS and helping to protect us from a different terrorist group. But I think the president should respond. He will respond. I think it will be a multi-level response. But I think he will also have that strategic imperative in mind of deterring more attacks, but also preventing a widening of the war.
Thank you so much for your responses to the questions. And within the time limit, we appreciate it. You may now give a 1.5-minute closing statement.
Thank you very much. Thanks again. Let me end where I began by thanking you for the work you're doing, supporting great candidates around the country. I've been proud to work with you for many years now, supporting Democratic candidates, raising money for them, including one of my colleagues in this race, and helping elect great Democrats to the House and Senate. It's something I want to continue to do as a U.S. Senator. I'm running for the Senate and hoping to go to the Senate to provide leadership when it comes to defending our democracy and our institutions, leadership in the big fights during that existential struggle for democracy during the last 4 years. And I hope there's never another 4 years of Donald Trump. I was in the center of that fight. But California also needs a senator that knows how to get things done. You can walk down the halls of Congress and trip over 5 people saying they're going to shake up the place. But what are rare, what is hard to find in the Congress are people who actually know how to get things done. I'm proud to have authored California's Patient Bill of Rights. I'm proud to have authored legislation to bring up-to-date textbooks to our schools. I'm proud to have brought back millions to find shelter for those who are homeless. I'm proud to have helped build the early earthquake warning system in California and up and down the west coast of the country. I'm proud to have authored legislation on press freedom. And I'm running because Californians need a senator who can lead in those big fights, but also knows how to get things done.